Hi everyone, I'm Imogen from Course Report. We are a resource for researching which coding bootcamp is right for you. We have a directory of different coding schools, tons of reviews, a blog, and interviews with instructors, students, graduates, and employers, all to help you work out which bootcamp you want to go to. Today, I'm excited to be speaking with Eric, who graduated from Codesmith's Software Engineering Immersive in Los Angeles in April 2018. And Eric is going to tell us how his path led him to Codesmith, his experience learning at Coding Bootcamp, and how his career is going since he graduated. So Eric, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
So maybe we could start and you can tell us a bit about your kind of career and education background and how your path led you to go to Codesmith.
Sure. So I actually dropped out of college. I went to California State School out of high school and just didn't really sink into it, and ended up moving to LA and pursued a lot of more entrepreneurial endeavors. Started a marketing branding consultancy out here in Venice and did some work in real estate, and sort of dabbled around a few things but never found a home. And then it was funny. I mean, I've always been sort of really wanting to have the idea of like going into a career with a 9 to 5, I need to go to an office and get dressed, and like all of that was really unappealing to me. And I wanted to travel and surf and sort of get to enjoy life while being able to work. So I'd been trying to figure out how to do that. And I had never really considered software engineering because I sort of thought that it was just something that sort of shy, introverted, like nerdy kids did. And I was so wrong. I was just totally wrong about that. And then I met actually the CEO of Codesmith, Will, at a bar one night after a shift at a local restaurant in Venice. And he sort of pulled out his phone and gave me his little spiel. And he was like, "Oh, there's somebody else who's just like you, dropped out of high school or dropped out of college and was working at a restaurant. And now he's, off doing whatever." And so then I did like a series of interviews and just double checked, like, okay, so I can work remote, right? And I could like go live somewhere where I could surf, right? And just after I checked off those boxes, I wrote a few lines of code. And that's when I really realized that actually I really loved all the solving of puzzles and the sort of really logic oriented nature of engineering really appealed to me. And that was it. I was in.
That's awesome. That's so cool. It's so kind of serendipitous that you happen to bump into Will.
It's so serendipitous. I know. I almost didn't. It was his girlfriend at the time's last night at the restaurant, and we were going to drinks to say goodbye, and I was exhausted and I almost didn't even go. So
wow.
Good thing I did.
And so had you considered coding before that meeting with Will? Like, had you kind of... No, not at all.
I mean, I had looked at it, but I just thought that I would hate it. I thought that I thought that I wouldn't like it at all. And I'm really glad that he convinced me to give it a second look.
That's awesome. That's so cool. And so once you decided that, you were interested in pursuing Codesmith, what was the kind of application and interview process like that you had to go through for that?
For Codesmith specifically? Yeah, so Codesmith's process is essentially like they want you to have a solid fundamental understanding of JavaScript. So they do these free, I know they still do the hard parts classes, which is their like free weekly classes where they get people together, and it's also, I think, a place for them to start to meet students and see if they're a good fit for the Codesmith program. And then I was also doing sort of some of the free tutorials. I used Code Academy for their Intro to JavaScript course. And then really depended a lot on the other people that were going, because I was really coming from a zero technical background. So there was a huge learning curve for me off the bat. So I really was able to sort of lean on the community of people that were either applying to Codesmith or in Codesmith, and sort of resources on the internet.
Oh, that's awesome that all that kind of preparation was available. And then did you have to take some kind of coding test to make sure you were ready to take the full program?
Yeah, that was pretty intense. I mean, if you've never like, I'd never experienced an interview like that, but assuming that Codesmith is still using a similar interview process, it would be like you sit down in a room with one of their resident, I can't remember their official name for them, but they're like the people that are working there that are either engineers themselves, have gone through the Codesmith program, or they're a teacher there. And and they're going to ask you like a series of escalatingly difficult engineering algorithms, from basic stuff like how do you declare a variable to I think like some of my final recursions were some of my final algorithms were recursion and some functional programming stuff. But I definitely failed the first time. I definitely freaked out and failed the first time just because I was so inexperienced with that type of interview format. And I failed not on my technical skills, but just on my comfort level, which is good because interviewing for tech positions is sort of its own thing, and it's not a whole like interviewing for anything else that I've experienced, at least. So better to have trial by fire there than with somebody that you're trying to get to pay you a bunch of money.
Totally. And that's so awesome that you were able to retake the application test.
I think they'll give you like 3 tries, and if you're still like failing after 3 tries, then they give you like sort of a mandatory wait period before you can apply again.
That makes sense.
And that's just sort of, that just depends on the person, I think.
That makes sense. And so after you failed the first time, did you go away and kind of just learn a few more things and then come back more prepared?
After I finished crying, yes, that's what I did.
Well,
no, I actually I knew that I failed. I knew that I failed because I was uncomfortable with the interview process, but that like technically I was probably still ready to get in. So I just sort of like came back, regrouped, signed up for another application in a week or 2 or something like that, and then I was able to pass.
Nice one. Well, congratulations for getting in. I've heard it is hard to get into Codesmith, so that's awesome.
It is, yeah. Depending on where you're coming from, yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. And so once you had got in and you had started at the campus, can you tell me a bit about like what your cohort was like and what the kind of learning experience was like there?
Okay, my cohort was great. We had some super sharp people in there. Like the second half of Codesmith is you're building some sort of advanced tooling mechanism. Mostly, there's oftentimes developer tools that you're building, like open source developer tools. And on my team, we had a guy that had dropped out of his USC master's program to do Codesmith. We had a CS grad. We had another guy we had like a really young dude who was sort of like me, like coming from a zero technical background. And then we had another guy that had been working as a junior, I think PHP developer, PHP Ruby developer, but really felt like he wasn't learning anything. So went to Codesmith to get into web development. And the USC guy ended up going to a blockchain startup. One of the other guys was like this algorithm genius, went to Google. And yeah, those were, and then my other buddy went to I think, was he at a blockchain startup as well? I think 2 of them went to blockchain startups. Our cohort was big, real mixture of like ages and a real variety of different technical backgrounds, a lot of really good personalities. And then in terms of like how the educational process works over there, it's like the official program is 13 weeks. First half of that is called the fire hose, where you're just getting hit with information every day, and you're going from, they essentially go from the front end through the back end. So you start on like HTML, CSS, work on front end frameworks, end up hitting server layers and database stuff. And then you do 2 weeks worth of projects where you just sort of either, I mean, you don't have to do full stack stuff, but a lot of people end up doing CRUD applications. And if you're new to coding and you don't know what that is, it's just sort of basic create, write, update, delete, which is sort of the types of operations that you're going to be doing all over the place in your engineering practice, like actually in your career. So you do a bunch of those, then you get your senior group, and you guys do a big research. You have like a week to research and figure out what you want to build. And then the whole second half of the course is about building that developer tool, which you're eventually then going to use as essentially your sales pitch for yourself when you're trying to convince these tech companies about why you're actually a mid to senior level developer and not a junior developer, which is pretty effective. And then also part of that second half is a lot of sort of career development work, learning how to handle interviews, doing practice interviews, getting an understanding of like what the technical interview process looks like and how you need to approach it, and salary negotiations and all that kind of stuff.
Wow, that's awesome. It sounds like a lot of material that gets covered.
It's so intense. It's totally worth it. It's totally worth it, but it is, I think it's hands down, at least from what I've heard from people that have been through sort of other boot camps, it sounds like it's on the upper end of intensity in terms of boot camp experiences.
Yeah, wow. And then did you have a favorite project that you worked on at Codesmith?
There's one of my projects I still use every day pretty much, which is it was like one of the first projects I built. This is like this little daily journal where I put in a few gratitudes and intentions and affirmations, and then I deployed it to Heroku, and I still use it every day. So I like that one's still my favorite. I share it with my friends. I've got friends that use it. I've been meaning to deploy it to Amazon and like actually launch it, but I just can't seem to find the energy on the weekends. So.
Oh, that's so cool. Was that something you built towards the end of Codesmith?
No, that was like the first thing that I built.
Oh, wow.
The project that we did for the senior project was super fun as well. But I use the first one that I built more than I use anything else that I built there.
That's so cool. What kind of tech did you build that first project with?
So I built it to be full stack, although it didn't really require it. I just did it for the practice. So I think I had a Mongo database hooked up to a Node server, hooked up to a React front end, and got to play around with React transition group animations as well, which was pretty fun as part of that. But no state library. It was a pretty simple application, didn't require it. No routing. Yeah.
Well, that's really cool. You were mentioning that Codesmith gave you some advice about, understanding the technical interview and how to approach job hunting. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about that process and what kind of resources were provided to you in that.
So they were really good about just like, I think one of the things that's difficult is like, one, just the pressure of being in a technical interview. Two, handling imposter syndrome, because like for somebody like me, like I had done a lot of things entrepreneurially and I had made some money over time, but I'd never applied for a position like I was applying for a position in tech and for the pay that I was applying for. So there's a whole thing of being like, that you need to have that voice in your head that says, I'm totally worth this, like this, I'm good enough to be in this position. I'm worth this amount of pay. And you need to, as being where I am now, where I've been in that position for a while, going into the interview now, I'd be like, yeah, this is what I'm asking for. This is what I was making before. And it would just be totally nonchalant. But if you don't have that background, then it's not that easy. So you definitely deal with like, I think, imposter syndrome. I think they're really good about helping you with that. They're really good about helping you cultivate a story and helping you understand what, like, as engineers we're looking for and what we're not necessarily looking for, because like nobody's expecting you to know everything. That's impossible. Nobody's expecting you to be an expert on every piece of our technical stack. It's also impossible. Like we lean on each other all the time. People are sharper with CSS, people are sharper with TypeScript, people are sharper with Apollo configurations, whatever. So that's not the expectation. We are expecting you not to be a jerk. We are expecting you to be somebody where if you push code up and I push back on it and I say, actually, I think there's a better way to do this, that you're not going to get your feelings hurt and become defensive. And I'm going to have to worry about stepping on eggshells with you over code that you have like a little too much pride over. So I think they're really good at sort of giving you an accurate perspective of what we're looking for as engineers for teammates and what's important and what's not so important. And then in terms of salary negotiation, like that's just a whole art in itself. And they'll give you the exact right things to say, so that you just know how the rest of us do it when we go to ask for money and say this is what we're worth, because there's the right way to do that and there's the wrong way to do that.
Wow, yeah, that sounds like really valuable advice. That's awesome. And then can you tell me a bit about your career and your journey since you graduated from Codesmith? Like, how did you find your first role and how has your kind of career progressed from there?
Yeah, sure. So out of Codesmith, I was looking for I was almost exclusively looking for front-end React remote positions, of which there are a lot. So although I was applying to other stuff just for practice. So I ended up getting a job at Hilton Hotels, where I started working as what they call a render tier developer. I don't even know what that means, but I'm a front-end developer for Hilton. I started on a small team on one of they have a bunch of them, but I just started on one of their smaller teams. And I actually had a bit of a crazy start to my career. At first we started in this really stable place, and then at some point our application became incompatible with a bunch of shared logic that we were using. So like, for instance, like Hilton has a bunch of different applications that all use the same footer. So instead of us rewriting the footer every time, we keep that in a separate repository and pull that into whatever code base that we need to use the footer in, which means that you have to at some level be compatible with that footer that's being consumed by your application. So at some point we became incompatible, and it launched us into this total rewrite, which I ended up spearheading alone while I was living in Panama, and I had just like left the country to go try and do the whole digital nomad thing. So that was super stressful. That was intense. That was really intense. But it ended up working out fine, which I think is a testament to just my problem solving abilities that I was able to garner through the Codesmith process. Because I really jumped into, for anybody that has like a technical or somewhat technical understanding, we stripped out the state logic. So we moved from Redux to Apollo link state. We changed design patterns in terms of how our componentry was designed, which meant that every component had to be rewritten. We moved into we moved to TypeScript, so from no typing to strongly typed. We changed. We put it on Next, so we moved to server-side rendering, which meant that like the outermost framework was also different, which changed a lot of things about how our application worked. So yeah, I got super thrown into the deep end on that, but it worked out well. I ended up actually getting a promotion from it, and got put on as a lead developer for that pod. I just recently got transferred to a bigger team, which is something I was asking for, and that project got sort of decommissioned. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I've been there now for about a little over a year, and it's nice. Good. I have a good work-life balance. Hilton's a huge company, so they don't, we're not chasing the next round of funding, which is, I was not really interested in a startup. So that's great.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on landing such an awesome job, and congrats on your promotions that you've had since you got there. That's super cool.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a fun year.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm interested in like when you first started at the Hilton, what kind of like onboarding or training did you need? And did you have to learn a lot of new technologies that you hadn't learned at Codesmith?
No, I got really lucky in terms of technologies because it was the exact technology that I had used at Codesmith, right? It was React, Redux, GraphQL, which my senior project was GraphQL oriented, so I really understood GraphQL. When we transitioned, when we started doing this technical transition in my pod, all of that was new. I had no experience with Apollo Link State or Next or TypeScript, so I had to learn a ton of that. I had to learn a ton of learn a ton of the stuff there. I'm still learning it. And what was the first half of your question?
I was wondering if there was any kind of onboarding or training process when you first joined the team.
Yeah, there's an onboarding and training process. I think one of the things, like if you're coming out of a boot camp, is that you're working on your applications there, but they're so tiny. Like the scope of the applications that you're going to work on in your boot camp is so small comparing that to something like what we do at Hilton, right? Where we have language translations and we have performance technology that's embedded in there. We have a whole underlying layer of accessibility technology, so that people with accessibility issues can still access our website. There's A/B testing type design technology in there. So anyway, you're gonna be dealing with a lot more stuff than you'd be dealing with at the boot camp. And in terms of like onboarding, unless you're coming in as like a super senior person with experience in like that stack, nobody's expecting you to come in and like be an expert in the repository overnight. Like it takes time. Usually like 4 to 6 weeks is sort of like our anticipated turnaround for you to go from tickets are taking you longer to work because you're new to like you're in the flow. So in terms of onboarding, it's usually like a tour of the repository. Here's all the things that are working. Here's our challenges. Here's like technical debt here's technical debt that we're working on. Here are features that we're working on. Here's what works well. Here's what doesn't work well. And then they usually just give you like something easy to start off with, so that warm up work.
Oh, cool. Oh, it sounds like a good process. And how did you actually land this role at the Hilton? Like, did you just cold apply for it, or did you kind of meet someone through networking? Like, how did that all work?
So I found it somehow on LinkedIn. I'm not totally sure how that happened, if they reached out to me or I reached out to them. It was, at that point, it was like sort of a blur.
And was there like an intense interview process that you had to go through?
Their interview process was a little bit more lax than some of the other ones, in terms of like their on-site. Like they didn't actually fly me out anywhere, but that ended up just being like a group discussion with like 5 engineers on the phone for like an hour, which was, and then there was a take-home project. But comparatively, like the other on-sites that I went to were like way more intense, and they were like 4 hours of, an hour each with different engineers that were all grilling me. So Hilton's onboarding process was the least intense of the interviews that I did.
That's cool. Well, congrats again. That sounds like an awesome job.
Thanks.
And since you've graduated from Codesmith, I suppose it's just over a year and a half ago. How do you kind of feel like you've grown as a developer? Like, do you feel like you've gone from, I suppose you were saying like they teach you how to come across as like a mid-level engineer. Do you feel like you've become like a senior engineer in that time?
Yes and no. It depends on the scope, right? Like, so like on the project that I just left, like I was the senior engineer on that project, and I was working inside of higher level like configure or lower level configurations. Like in our next setup, I did things like hooking up mock data so that we could pull things from our database and store it client side for like a better developer experience, and did some very senior stuff. Now on the pod that I'm on now, there are some people that have way more experience than me. So in terms of doing those more complex configuration stuff, we're going to default to them because I could do it, but it's going to take me a lot longer and they're going to end up having to be involved in it anyway. So I'm always trying to sort of pick off the hardest thing that I can find if I feel like I can do it. But I would say I sort of like I was a big fish in a very small pond, and now I'm like a medium fish in a bigger pond.
That's awesome. I'm interested in like how your remote job actually works. Like, do you have to work the same hours as the other developers, and how do you kind of structure your days?
Yeah, so at least with I only have remote experience with Hilton, and it does vary depending on like where you go. But I can speak at least to what it's like working with Hilton, and I think just like some general challenges and things that people need to be aware of if they're going remote, which is that there's a couple things that like you need to be able to do. Like you need to be able to organize your own day. You need to be able to stay motivated at home if you're working from home, because it's so easy for you to wake up and be like, well, I'm just going to make a little breakfast. Oh, I'm just going to grab a little coffee. Well, my friend said she wanted to grab a little coffee, so I'm going to talk to her for a bit. And then all of a sudden it's noon and you haven't done a thing. So like that totally happens. It happens to all of us. But like, if you're somebody that's like really easy distracted and needs the structure of an office, then like, maybe it's good for you. There's also like, you need to have a voice, and having a voice in a remote team is different. Like, it's not like you can't just sit at your desk and you're there. Like we need to see you being active in the chats. We need to see you being active in problem solving outside of like the specific thing that you're working on. If you have a problem, you need to be able to reach out and be like, I need help, and you need to know how to like raise your hand and how to ask for help. Those were some of the challenges that I had to overcome, like working remote. Let's see what else. But like that being said, you have a lot more freedom. Like, so, in terms of like being there and like people knowing that I'm there, like people can know I'm there while I'm eating lunch and I'm not necessarily working, but I'm still like responding to their chats when they reach out to me, but at the same time, like I can go take off and surf for a couple hours in the middle of the day, and most days, and like nobody's gonna say anything to me about it. The thing that ends up being the most important in engineering is like you getting your work done on time, and you being in meetings when they're happening, and for the most part during the time in which you're expected to be present, that you're mostly present. Nobody's expecting you to be there all the time, like taking a lunch, or you need to have doctor's appointments, or you got kids or whatever. But you need to, it's really apparent when people disappear. And if you keep doing that, it becomes really obvious really fast. And that is a quick recipe to get yourself booted off of a remote team.
That makes sense. Yeah. Oh, it sounds really great. And thanks for those bits of advice for other people who might be thinking about remote work. That's really handy. And I'm interested in how your background has been useful in your new career. I know you mentioned that you've kind of been involved in entrepreneurship and things like that.
I don't know that like skill set wise that there's necessarily something that has translated over outside of that. Like, I think entrepreneurship is a really good mental training ground for anything, because it's like so hard, so demanding. The to-do list never ends. Your business doesn't care about your friends or your romantic relationships or your sleep. So in terms of that, like I think that that's been helpful in like sort of tenacity, especially like in engineering, you're sort of constantly being thrown stuff where you're like, I have no idea what's wrong, like, and I don't know how to fix it. And you just have to then start biting it off in little chunks and figuring it out. So I think that has helped. I wouldn't say that any specific skill set has prepared me necessarily for engineering, because engineering is like pretty specific.
That makes sense. That's cool. And what would you say has been the biggest challenge or roadblock in your journey to becoming a fully fledged software engineer?
I think there's a mental aspect to it, which is like sort of, now I am trying to like walk into the fire as much as I can. Like, I want to be put in places that are challenging. I want to be taking on tickets that are things that I don't know how to do, that sound intimidating. And I think that has really helped me sort of propel my knowledge, and gain a lot more experience and understanding of the technologies that we're using. And I certainly was not trying to do that at the beginning, because I was sort of like, give me the easy thing so that they don't know, I'm not a real engineer, which is like not true, right? It's like total like imposter syndrome thing. But I think just overcoming that, and understanding that like I do have the skill set to like do my job, and I am capable of taking on things that are hard at work, and then not just like knowing that, but then desiring to take on the hard things. Yeah, I think that answers your question.
Yeah, totally. And I'm interested in, like, when you look back over the last couple of years, what role do you think Codesmith has played in your success? Like, do you think it would have been possible for you to get to where you are through maybe self-teaching, continuing with online learning and that kind of thing?
No, I mean, maybe, I guess, yeah, but it would have been a lot longer and harder road. Would I have had the mental tenacity to make it through? I don't know. I mean, it was so hard even doing it with all the help of Codesmith. You definitely can. I mean, you definitely can. There's so many resources out there in terms of learning to code, but I wouldn't suggest it. I certainly wouldn't suggest it. I think the in terms of like what Codesmith costs and how long it takes you, and then while that might seem like a lot of money, then if you compare that to traditional education or going through a master's in something, it's like it's pretty cheap and it's super fast. So you totally would not be my suggestion.
That makes a lot of sense. And since you graduated, have you been able to keep in touch with any of your fellow classmates or any of the instructors, or maybe like Will or anyone like that?
I was just talking to Will and their business advisor, Eric Kirsten, actually today. I think I'm going to go grab a beer with them while I'm back in California. Yeah, I keep in contact with them. One of the guys from my senior team is now one of my really close friends. He's come down to my place in Peru, and is coming back to spend a couple months with me this summer. He also surfs, which is how we became friends. So got like a little little beach house and a little surf town in Peru. That's all set up to work, has good Wi-Fi and stuff. So yeah, totally. Yeah, I definitely like try and hang out with a few of them when I'm back.
That's so cool that you can work from Peru with your job.
It's unreal. Sometimes sometimes it's just like life, and then sometimes I remember how ridiculous it is, and I'm like, that's insane that I get to do that.
That's awesome. And so what advice do you have for other people who are thinking about making a career change like this, going through an intensive coding program?
Say maybe know what you want out of it. I would say know what you want out of it. Like the thing with engineering specifically is that like it's like all they're teaching you how to do is play with the Legos, and like you can build whatever you want with those Legos for whoever you want with those Legos to do whatever you want. And there are so many ways to slice that up, and so many different paths within that I think like having an understanding of like what's important to you and will inform your decisions. Most importantly, after you get out of school, so that you're not like trying to be everything for everybody, or work life balance wise. Like there's a lot of considerations that like you should look at. Now that being said, you can really have like almost whatever you want. Like if you want to go make a difference in the world, there's a place for you in tech to go do that. If you are like me and it was the lifestyle that attracted you to it, like I don't like if you're interested in doing the digital nomad, you want to travel and have that kind of flexibility. Like I don't know that there's a better career than tech to do that. So I would 100% would suggest that you have a look down this path seriously. If you are like an entrepreneur and you're that type of crazy and you want to be involved with people that are that type of crazy, like there's a lot of them out there too for you, and they're looking for you. So it's like, you know, just have a sit down with yourself and decide like what's important to you and what do you want, because you can do it. Everybody needs you. Like if you're going into tech, like everybody needs you. So you have a lot of options in terms of what your life will look like outside of Codesmith or whatever bootcamp you choose to go to.
That's great advice. Yeah. Well, those are all of my questions now. Is there anything else that you wanted to add about your experience at Codesmith or anything else?
I would just say for people to like, if you're looking at programs, like really go talk to grads, do your research. I think you have this really wonderful, there's this really wonderful thing about boot camps as a whole, which is that like they actually publish reports on student outcomes. So like you can look at Codesmith and I think their average student outcome is $105,000 a year. Like what other there's very few other industries or educational spaces where like that kind of stuff is available. So have a look at that. Definitely have a look at that. Let's see what else. And you know, the other thing is that like I found in my research that there are some schools that are trying to do all the things, and there's some schools that are just doing a couple things and they're doing them well. And that was one of the reasons I chose Codesmith, was because they're not doing too many things there, but the things that they are doing, they're doing really well and really consistently well. So in my experience, you know, I've spoken to some grads from other schools. I don't want to bash other schools because I think that they can be a good start for a lot of people. But I found that Codesmith was just sort of consistently better. And when I was out in the job market talking to grads from other schools, I felt like I was way more prepared to be out there than some of the other people that were like out there looking for the same job. So I would just say do your research. Go check out the Vibe. Like most of these places have free educational nights. So like don't take my word for it. Like go to their free nights, talk to their students, talk to their grads, meet their professors. Like all of them are going to be intense. All of them are going to be intense. And you really want to be in an environment that you feel comfortable and included, and that is going to be there to support you through something that will be both mentally and intellectually, like mentally, emotionally, and intellectually challenging. So do your research before you jump into one. And don't worry about, like, I know, like, I think Codesmith is probably one of the more expensive ones, but they're all cheap. Like, I just wouldn't worry about the price, because they really, in perspective to like what you're going to make as an engineer and how long it's going to take you to be there, like they're all pretty inexpensive, even though it might not seem like it. So anyway, do your research, pick the one that's right for you. I totally recommend Codesmith, hands down. But everybody's got to make the decision that's right for them.
Oh, that's really good advice. That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. And thank you in general for making time to chat. This has been a really great conversation. I think it's going to be so many useful things in here for people to go away with. So thank you so much. Yeah, I hope so. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.